All right, I think we are live now. And I'll say good morning or good afternoon or just good day to everyone, depending on where you're at. I want to thank everyone who has joined so far and who may join. I want to thank you for taking time out of your weekend to join us here. This is a program called The Nation's Voice. It's presented by Unitix Not Politics, and that's who I represent. We won't talk a lot about that. We have a topic that we want to talk about today, but I do want to spend a little time talking about what we're trying to do here. First of all, a little bit about Unitix Not Politics. So UNP is a nonpartisan group, and our goal is to facilitate a new approach to this social discourse that we're all involved in right now. And the ambition of this particular series is to begin a process of healing through discussion. You know, the idea is to get average Americans, just who I refer to like myself as Larry Lunchmeat, just from all backgrounds and points of view, but people who have discovered that you know what we believe is only one of many commonalities. You know, we got together because we believe in this thing that Americans can come together and discuss the problems that confront us in a safe space and be united in seeking first to understand and then to be understood. And I think that's an important principle. The idea really is to listen to each other. And then we can talk and respond. And it's okay to disagree without becoming disagreeable. So that's the idea. You know, what we're hoping is that we can change the way that this social discourse is happening. Because if we don't change the way that we're approaching this, it's going to be difficult for us to get ourselves out of situation that we see happening around us all right now. To put it simply, we just can't expect the tactics of the past and the people who benefit from perpetuating those tactics to solve the problems of today. So, you know, the idea is if you keep following a broken compass, you're just going to stay lost. So we want to try and see if we can't do this a little bit different. So that's the idea of Unitix Not Politics. Now today we want to have a conversation. We've got together, I think, a great panel, again, of average Americans who want to talk about some of the things that are happening out there. And I want to also say that we want to invite the audience to participate. So if you notice at the bottom of your screen, there should be a menu that has Q&A. That Q&A is there for you to interact with us. And if you have any questions that you'd like to pose to the panel or just hear them respond to, please put it in the Q&A. And our producer will take a look and really relay that and get answers to you. And then secondly, what I'd like to say is that if you want to want your mic opened and you have something and you'd like to make a comment, put that in that Q&A as well, and we'll try and get to you as we can. So with that, I want to go ahead and launch this off. We're really excited about this, and I want to have our panel introduce themselves. So with that, real quick, I'm going to start with Ed. Why don't you open up and introduce yourself? Ed, you want to go ahead and open up your mic? And
Yes, sir. I am fumbling through technology. I apologize.
No need.
Hi, everyone. My name's Ed. I self-identify as a Republican. I am straight, and I am white with a Middle Eastern background, and I am not a native-born American. I'm born in Canada, and I am mid-40s. You know, I'm kind of like an elderly lady. He keeps his age to himself. But yeah, I'm more or less a conservative Republican living at the edge of libertarianism, and I support the president with caveats.
All right, thank you, Ed.
Sure.
Melvin, do you want to open up your mic and your camera and introduce yourself?
No, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, well, much like Ed, I don't know why I'm technically challenged. Oh, there it is.
Great, there you are.
So, how y'all doing? My name is Melvin, and I'm a Democrat. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I have a practice here in Colorado, and I don't necessarily uh, uh, see myself as a political giant, but I am and have been a activist for uh, for over 40 years. So,
All right. Thank you, Melvin. Gabriel.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, everybody. Gabriel. And I don't identify as Democrat or Republican. I don't actually have any sort of political affiliation. So it just kind of depends on what's out there, the subjects that are out there. I teach acting, and I'm also um, a CrossFit coach and entrepreneur out in Los Angeles, California. Yeah. So, and I've been an activist for women's rights, LGBTQ rights, and just any minority rights. I've been an activist for 24 years.
All right. Thank you, Gabriel.
Yeah.
And last but by no means least, Cassidy.
Hello, I'm Cassidy and I live in the Bay Area and I'm a student. I tend to lean more liberally and I am registered as a Democrat.
All right. So excellent. So thank you all, first of all, for joining. Appreciate your bravery. And I'm going to say this is obviously our first event that we've put on. So hopefully you'll forgive any roughness as we are working through this. And our producer, I know, is working really hard behind the scenes. So with that, let me go ahead and set up the first part of our discussion. I want to start it by just kind of with a personal observation, right? I realized just recently that all my life I'd been using a racial slur, and I'd been using this racial slur without even knowing it. And so I realized as that how easy it would have been for me to be deemed, if I'd have been in the public eye in today's atmosphere and inadvertently using this word that I've heard all of my life, that my parents use, everyone I know use, my children, unfortunately I've used it, and I didn't know, and I realized that if I'd have been in the public eye in today's environment, that it could very well have opened me to charges of racism or ethnic insensitivity, even though I simply had no idea. Now I'm going to tell you what this racial slur is, and hopefully I'm not offending anybody, but the word is Eskimo. Okay, so Eskimo. I grew up using that word, and it, as it turns out, that word, as we know, refers to an ethnic group of circumpolar peoples that really stretch from eastern Siberia all the way across Canada and to England, are various people, various cultures, and certainly don't see themselves as a single group, and yet we've used this word. Now I bring this up because my use of this word came out of ignorance, not out of racism. And I wonder, and I want all the panelists and the audience as well to kind of reflect on that, and contemplate other terms and ideas that may be driving misunderstandings between people in our society today. Just like these, the E word, as I'll say from now on, has more than one side, right? So I want to talk about that real quick, and then I'll open up to the panelists. Now, some people obviously believe it is a racist slur and it's derogatory, derived ultimately from a Cree word meaning eater of raw meat. Others say it's a benign term, derived from the same root word as husky, for our dogs, for those dogs, and that it's a native term, a Native American term that meant snowshoe netter. Or perhaps even there was a recent study that said it may have been from a term used by French traders that simply meant people who speak a different language. But either way, that it was not meant as a racist term, and it was simply a descriptive term. Still, I want to point out that the Inuit Circumpolar Council has rejected that term, and there is no question of that term's association with a long history, of course, of colonialism and cultural erasure. So, with that in mind, though, I want to ask you about this idea of now political correctness, because when you think about that, I didn't know, and so ignorance was the reason I would use that term. And if the solution, or if the way that we resolve ignorance, the cure for ignorance, is knowledge, how do we gain that knowledge if we can't if when something like this happens, the first reaction is to label someone as a racist, or to react to what has been said as opposed to perhaps what is an innocent inquiry and trying to seek to understand? So I hope I make myself clear. So I'll ask the question this way. Is political correctness helping the conversation in America, or is it hurting? And I'm going to go first to you, Gabriel. What are your thoughts?
So overall, I'll answer up front. I say that political correctness is hurting the conversation, because what it is it's the avoidance of using certain terms as to not offend or be offensive or marginalized groups. And the problem is I think the question we need to be asking is not why somebody said something, or not what somebody said, but why they said it. So how you sort of spoke of, you were using Eskimo, and that's just how you were brought up. If we just say you cannot use that term, you can't use that term, right? Then that's not even addressing what the actual issue is. We're just saying don't say these things so you don't offend people. And so what you're doing is basically ignoring the elephant in the room, hoping that it'll go away. It's like sort of putting a Band-Aid over a broken leg. It's not really fixing it. It's just like covering it up. And so there's this whole thing about cancel culture and whatnot in society today. And I'm sure that'll be a topic that we really get into, but it needs to be addressed as to the why. And there's so many conversations about why are people so angry right now, and why can't I say this, or why can't I say that, without actually addressing what lies underneath all of that. What are the underlying implications of why people are using certain terms, and then why people shouldn't be able to use them. And certain terms start off as something and then become something else. And so if we don't address why it became something else, then we don't really understand why we're being told this is offensive to this other group, especially if you're not part of that group.
Thank you, Gabriel. I'm going to cut you off there and ask everyone to limit themselves to about 2 minutes, as Gabriel just did. Anyone else jump in there?
So I think, first of all, I think political correctness already makes it kind of divisive, because being correct doesn't have to be political. And I want to be real clear about the terminology. If back then it was, when I say back then, using the term, we'll go with Eskimo, it was a term that was used to describe or make people aware of a different culture. As we grow, we also do learning, because if we don't change some things, then it's always going to remain the same. And so, so just because it's correct, what makes it political is because one side or the other one has chosen to do that. And when you say political correctness, when I was kind of growing up, political correctness meant that you had to be a liberal, only liberals make changes, because that means then those who were Republicans would remain stagnant. And so just because the term coon at one time was acceptable because because it was at that time, until we raise people's awareness that that's no longer a word that you want to use to describe somebody else. So, and if you don't know what that term was, I want you to know that's a racial term also that you probably don't hear. And I think and I know I got a limit to 2 minutes, but anyway, our time, times, as we progress technologically as a society, also, we also have grown mentally, and we become more aware. I'm a therapist, so I'm looking at a perspective. If we didn't change terminology, um, people would still stay ignorant.
All right, Mel, I'm gonna call time on you there and give it to someone else. Anyone?
Cassidy, would you like to go?
Sure. I agree. I think that the best we can do is like be receptive and understanding of why that is offensive and try to learn from it. And if it's offending somebody, we should think about what we're saying and try to react differently in the future.
All right.
If I may, I would say political correctness, because I went to a liberal-minded college, Kent State University, and I had the best of intentions in my mind, even as a conservative and a Republican growing up. However, it's become this weaponized thing to silence people who don't necessarily agree with that point of view. And I think when we use terms like ignorance, it's kind of a slight already. It could be just a lack of knowledge. I mean, when you say someone's ignorant, it sounds like someone's being deliberately offensive, as opposed to just not knowing. Like, I could back into a couch and not know it's there and fall over the couch, right? I mean, that's a lack of knowledge. That doesn't mean I'm deliberately ignorant of the couch. I think that these kind of things set up language in a term like using racist as a term to weaponize against people who just don't agree with you. It's like you use the term E-word as if you're putting it on the level of the N-word. And if that's the case, then so be it. But a lot of people, and if that's the good that comes out of political correctness, I'm all for it. But I think it becomes a thing where it's like, I'm offended, now you must bow. And I think that's a real disaster, and that's going to cause more tribalism than people think.
All right. So it sounds like the entire panel kind of lines up and has found some commonality in the idea that political correctness may actually be doing more to hinder racial progress than it is to help. So I want to challenge that, because and I'm just going to, as the moderator, if everybody's agreeing, then somebody's got to disagree, right? So I'm going to disagree here and see what you think here, because I'm going to point out that words have power, right? And there are people who, based upon the experiences that they've had in their background, find it difficult to hear certain things in certain terms. For instance, and I'm going to take it out of the realm of black and white, and I'm going to talk about, for instance, Holocaust deniers, right? And how for a person of Jewish background whose parents and ancestors may have been personally affected, and in the most tragic ways by that for them, hearing sometimes people simply dismiss that experience can be painful, and it can be difficult then for them to relate and to ask some of the questions here. So let's I mean, I think you've all agreed on the principle that PC hinders, but let's talk about the human element of it there, and how do you address that? What responsibility is on the speaker as opposed to the listener?
Well, And I just want to make clear, though, I didn't necessarily say that PC hinders. I was just saying that we were just taking politics off the term being PC, and it is just rather correctness. And I don't want to use the term politics. I somewhat agree with Ed in terms of that when you say politics, it brings up a whole different connotation. In terms of, I remember when political correctness was a bad word because you were made to feel, like, oh, he's just PC. And like I said, it made it sound like you're a liberal. So I'm just saying to you, I think correctness, it is important because correctness doesn't mean admonishment. It really means growth.
Okay.
It should mean growth.
Yes, I agree with you, right.
It doesn't. It ends up being this thing where we must call you from the herd because you are not agreeing with me. And I think that is destroying the bridge from one side. It takes two sides. You have to build a bridge from two sides. And when you take this thing and it becomes like the N-word is a weaponized word, isn't it? I mean, I don't think anyone would disagree with that. I mean, it's used to take someone down, right?
Yeah,
That's a weaponized. Yeah, that's a weaponized word. So, but also there's like defense weapons too, right? There's an offensive and a defensive. And the defensive can turn offensive, right? You know what I mean? And you could weaponize your way of speaking in a way of shaming someone into an oblivion who is not trying to offend you. So I think that's a grave mistake.
Yeah. Well, I think, and I'm sorry if I've derailed part of the conversation, but I want to address that. It's like one of the things that happened in our society was the term asylum. At one time, that was a great word. I mean, it shared that's what's going on. Then it became bad when we decided to change the word asylum, and we opened up the doors to all the institutions. And in that sense, it created a problem. But it wasn't because of political correctness. It was more of human correctness. It was us trying to make the word so it didn't have that stigma. And that's what happens with a lot of these terms is that, what was okay at one time, it then became a negative word. And so then we needed to change that. It's like mental retardation at one time was perfectly fine. And then all of a sudden, because we're trying to normalize people, we said, well, you can't use that word anymore because it put people into a category and people then made it a negative. So I just wanted to, and so it's not political correctness, it's talking about how do we talk to one another as human beings. That's what the correctness is supposed to do. That's what's supposed to happen. But but it was forced on us to say, oh, we put political correctness in a way it was defined that it only belonged to certain groups, and then that polarized us. Right. And so, I hope that makes sense.
All time on email and.
Okay.
All
well,
right.
Bill, I think you asked the question of what is the responsibility of sort of the speaker, right? I did. So I think in terms of that, I almost go by the rule of the speaking should require listening. So it depends on sort of your intention. If we are all trying to actually speak to each other, if there is a person that is trying to get a point across, like if I'm just trying to tell you, no, I want to use that word. This is why I want to use that word without even sort of listening to why that's offensive or trying to understand why that's offensive to somebody, well, then that conversation is going nowhere. It's not actually a conversation. It's just someone talking at somebody and telling them why they're right. So if you are seeking to understand before being understood, I feel like that should be the responsibility of that person, especially if you're trying to defend your stance. If you're really trying to defend your stance on something, to me personally, you're more credible if you have opened up yourself to those possibilities of what all of this actually is. Otherwise, you're just spouting out your ideas and not taking anything in, and so you don't grow at all. So me personally, I feel like that should be the responsibility of someone who is sort of speaking and defending their position, is a consideration of the other side, is actually to listen twice as much or even more so than you're speaking.
Right, because even if your intent is good, if you offend somebody, you should be receptive in listening to why that matters. And if they call you out, then maybe that's something that you can learn and grow from.
All right. It sounds like, there's a lot of great comments in the chat. And I'm hoping, I don't know if you're all looking at that. I'm hoping I can get some of those comments here on the call. So Jade is our producer. Jada, do we have, I believe Anthony was going to make a comment. Can we open his mic? Anthony, I think you should be able to open your mic. All right, you're on.
Yeah, he stepped away for a second. Sorry, this is Annette. We just joined together because Jade sent the link to both of us, and we didn't see a reason to join on two computers.
All right, no worries.
We both have a similar perspective on this, though. I've always been a wordsmith. I know, I enjoy reading, and I have a lot of words in my vocabulary. And one thing that really does drive me crazy is when people use words like political correctness and put their own application of the definition behind it. Because really, if you talk about correctness and political, those two words are antithetical to each other. Like they absolutely, it's an oxymoron. So when you're talking about the N-word and other words that people throw out, there's a lot of them. There's all kinds of racial slurs that can be thrown out in different inference. I think that if you're going to say that it's weaponized, you have to really take into consideration that if it's weaponized on both sides. It doesn't matter who's using it, that word is a weapon. And so many people are so offended by a white person or a Hispanic person or a Native American person using the N-word. I find that word incredibly offensive, no matter who's using it. If it's in music, if a person of color is using it, feeling that it's okay to sling it back and forth, to me, that word is a weapon, no matter who uses it or how they use it. And using it even in casual conversation, trying to take away from the negative history of that word is moving you in the wrong direction. It has nothing to do with political correctness or culture. It's completely taking a word that has been weaponized and perpetuating its continuity.
I missed, what was the word, Annette?
The N-word.
Yes. Okay.
If that word is a weapon, then nobody should be using it.
Well, I have to push back on that, I'm afraid, because we have freedom of speech. So if African Americans want to use that term with themselves, as far as it seems to me, and I could be wrong, and please correct me where I go astray, that it seems to me a symbol of shared struggle when one Black person says it to another. If I'm wrong, please let me know. When it's like, I'm together with you in this. And I understand that. But I feel like when I say weaponized, I mean weaponized to silence people from free speech. Free speech is the only thing that's going to really, really pull us together. And when you say, let's say we even outlaw the N-word. So are you going to start arresting Black people for using the N-word? I mean, it can get kind of ridiculous in a 1984 kind of way. And I think that's dangerous.
I think you make some great points here. I'm sorry, go ahead, Cassie.
I also think that as you go through time or as you start using a word differently, the connotations can change. So it doesn't have to be negative all the time. You can switch between different words and have them grow So maybe if Black people are using the N-word in a positive light, it could eventually change to something that's positive.
So that's an interesting segue to the question I wanted to throw out to the panel here, because so quick observation. I was walking through a mall one time, and behind me I heard someone yell, "What's up, my nigga?" I hope I didn't offend anybody. And I turned around, and the people who were talking to each other were all young white people, and that's who had said that to another white person. Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, I just want to say in terms of what, well, and you have to understand too, I also grew up in the era which that term, was inflammatory. I think that, it's kind of like the argument now that you have with the term redskin, and it was it's you want to try to make something that's offensive, make it positive, and I think that that's not. I don't think that that's real healthy, because it was the intent. I think Anthony wrote something in the thing about what's the intent behind these words, and that's that's where the correctness comes in. If it is, if it is to incite some reaction to you, then the intent is bad. I mean, you could say words don't hurt, the old saying, sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt me. And, it's if I was at a Klan rally, that word would have a lot of negative connotations for me and invoke a lot of things. But like I was going to say earlier, though, I grew up in the era where that word, no matter who said it, how it was said, it was offensive. It will always be offensive, because that was the generation I grew up in. Because if you look at the word niggardly, it is about, it describes a behavior, an action, and that's not really positive either. So
the word niggardly has a completely different etymology, right?
Exactly. Well, but that's go ahead. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to
it does not link to the word, the N word that we're talking about. I don't want to keep offending. The word niggardly has a completely different etymology. It's just actually convergence in sounds. I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is, even if you looked up, and I am not a wordsmith either. So when I looked up, first of all, a long time ago, when they, once again, different era, I looked at the word, and you're right, it may not have been a derivative from that, but however, how they describe, or the definition of the term, it had negative connotations. That's all. And
all right, I'm gonna call time on you, Mel, and let someone else jump in. Go ahead, Ed.
I just want to interject with something. Quick little anecdote. I was working in construction one time, and one of my fellow coworkers who was white addressed another coworker who was Black with the N-word, and my heart sank. Like, it really sank into my stomach. I was like, oh my God, what's going to happen next? But oddly enough, the Black person in this scenario took it as a friendship term. So I thought that was fascinating. I mean, because only in the sense that that was a privately negotiated understanding between these two gentlemen who have some friendship. So this person using this term, who on all outsets has no business using this term, whether you address it at the end with an ER or an A, right, is using this term with another Black person. So I think what the problem in the fear from my perspective is that the government gets involved and says, you can't say this and you'll go to jail if you do. And I think like society does a good enough job of setting the boundaries of what some can say and not say. And if we go down the governmental path to kind of to edict or to dictate what someone can say and not say, I think that's where the danger lies.
All right. So,
so I'm of the generation that definitely has heard it in both ways. You know, I've definitely had people greet me, other Black friends that have greeted me in that way, and it has been sort of, in their eyes, a camaraderie sort of thing, and but that's certainly by no means every one of my Black friends. It's nowhere even close to a majority of my Black friends, and I've definitely been called that by white people, and in a harmful, derogatory way. And it's like, should it be outlawed? But it goes back to the responsibility of like, who hears it, or who is saying it, and who's hearing it, and who we're having this discussion with, right? So it has been a term historically used by white people to put Black people in a certain place, generalizing that. And so this sort of idea of, if I can't use it, nobody else should be able to use it. Well, there is so much history of how it is sort of evolved in the different communities. Some Black people honestly feel like that has become a positive, or a reflection of how they came up, or where they grew up. And so there's so much to unpack with just saying, like, well, if one person says it, it should be offensive, and it should just be offensive across the board. That's kind of that's making that statement without actually digging into why did certain rappers start using this word? Why did certain Black people start incorporating this into their vocabulary? Why the change from ER to A? You know, whether it's right or wrong, and sort of like the implications in that, there has to be an understanding of, first of all, why that's there. And it just needs to be sort of understood that there are some people who, I'm sorry, you can't use that, because other people like you have primarily used that to, you know, bring down an entire other group. Am I saying it's right or wrong? No, but that understanding at least has to be in there.
So Gabriel, so if a white person came to you and said, "What's up, my nigga?" You're okay with that?
No, but we've had that conversation. But at some point we've had that conversation. See, with my friends, okay, we're in a car, we're driving, we're all singing the same rap songs, you know, and then only the Black people can say the N-word when it comes out, and then my white friends are sitting there uncomfortable because, you know, at home when nobody else is around, they're saying that. Now, is that right or wrong? I don't know, but there needs to be a deeper conversation there.
I go completely numb whenever that lyric comes in. And I like rap. I love rap, actually. I just don't listen. I'm more of a classical rocker kind of guy. But it's like, oh yeah, this song's great. And then I'll be quiet for this 2-3 seconds, and then please allow me to continue. I mean, I'm fine with that. But again, that's privately understood and negotiated, and not even really talked about. Like I said, my biggest fear as a conservative is, how much is the government going to be involved? How much of that is going to be involved? You want to protect people from hate crimes? I'm all for it, obviously. Any decent person would be in that camp. But when you start taking a side to the right to freedom of expression, and this dutiful sense of pursuing this anti-racism crusade, and you end up siding people that aren't really trying to offend or who want to be a part. I mean, look at the clothing line For Us, By Us back in the day. I mean, white people were wearing it, and that should be a good positive sign, because they are embracing that culture. They're not necessarily denigrating that culture or appropriating that culture. that's a positive sign, but that gets treated like a negative. But I think that these things are best left in private society and society independently having that on its own, as opposed to the government getting involved. That's where the fear comes from my point of view.
And I'll just
All
say
right,
this
and I'm
2
going to
seconds.
say that Ed gets the last word from the panel on
Okay.
that topic. Well, because the last word on this is, we're going to have to pivot to another question, but the last word on this is going to come from Anthony. And I think this time we actually have Anthony on, so hopefully I'm not announcing the wrong name. Anthony, go ahead.
Hey guys, how you doing?
Hey.
So real quick, I just wanted to throw a different perspective out there. Lately, I've had a lot of conversations in regards to the PC culture, probably just because of everything going on, things you see in the news and people are addressing certain issues. But for me, when I look at the military aspect, being 14 years in the Army, traveling around, dealing with military folks, it seems like we're more evolved with certain issues as far as race. The military has a different understanding. I mean, before we deploy to another man's country, we have months of training on somebody else's culture and what they would find acceptable and politically correct. Really, the old saying, when in Rome, but we spend months of training on this. Not saying the military is perfect. We all know the history. There's been issues with racism in the military, but we've put together a system of operating together. No matter where you come from in the United States, when you're in the same uniform, we have a way of talking to each other, and it's already set in stone. There's a way you address people in the military that's set in stone. And I think for us as Americans, we'll get to that point, but we need to realize that we have to set in stone some kind of SOP as far as how we deal with one another. It's already been proven that it can work. The military has done it for years. Just want to leave off with that.
All right, I think that's a great last word. Thank you, Anthony. Great last word for that topic. We're going to pivot now, and great conversation, panel. Thank you, and hopefully we can keep that going. So on a different aspect, I was having a conversation recently with a friend of mine, and I made a statement that he ended up agreeing with, and he had a kind of a sigh of relief in his voice. So just so we're all aware, the statement I made is that, all people generalize their experiences. So really everybody profiles because it's unless you're a new baby bird to the world, you have experiences, you're going to categorize them, and then you're going to rely on that background at some point and kind of extrapolate into the future. So really that's profiling. In a sense, everyone profiles. Now, the point is whether or not you agree with that statement. My friend said, with relief, and I asked him about that, and he said, well, I'm glad you said that because I can't say that because I'm white. Now, it's interesting, as we're trying to have a dialogue in America. So here's the question I have. Now, I'll say this. Given the, an uncertain sensitivity, I mean, we're friends, but we haven't had conversations on that. On one hand, you think it only makes sense that he'd be concerned that he might offend me. There's a whole lot of whether we just had the conversation about political correctness, right? But if he, or anyone for that matter, can't even utter something that they genuinely believe to be true, then how are we going to reach common understanding? So the question I have for the panel this time and for the audience is, are there truths that can only be uttered by mouths of color? Cassidy, what's your thought? I'm going to ask you to weigh in here first.
I think the same thing if the intent, if the underlying question is, should we be listening to the people that offends and holding, like, if you're speaking to somebody and that offends them, we should hold their perspective and neglect our own or not neglect, but just try to understand where they're coming from, why they're offended. I think that there are certain things that only people of color or minorities or certain groups of people have only experienced those things. And so really only they can tell their experience, and you kind of have to listen to what they're talking about.
A long time ago, I had a conversation with my younger brother, and the question had to do with, is individual rights more important than social rights or society's rights? And I think this is, one of those questions which it really just depends on perspective. It's like right now, the Tommy Hawk in the sports arena, and they're talking about Redskins and that sort of stuff, and they're having that, and there are some people say, geez, it's not being offensive, this is just tradition, and there's only a small segment that's being impacted by it, and this is back and forth about it. I think we have to remember that it's like with Black Lives Matter and the plateau is, well, all lives matter. Well, that's true, except for that slogan is not about making a statement about race. It's actually making a statement to focus, to make people aware. It's a focus statement. It is not a proclamation that nobody else matters. No. And I think, so what you're asking, Bill, is that, it's like if it offends one person, should we just ignore that for the good of the group of people who like it? It's like them tearing down the statues and stuff like that. Why? Because once again, we've also evolved. It's not why are people insisting on wanting to say certain things that's offensive? Why do we want to do this? So anyway, that's it. I cut myself off. It's 2 minutes. I don't want to hog the whole thing.
You're cut off.
Oh, well, that's a lot to unpack.
If you want to unpack, Ed, I can go.
Well, I'll just say this.
Okay.
The statues of the Confederacy, as some may find offensive, are still works of art in a way, right? I mean, they're expressions of something, whether you agree with it or not, right? But it's those things, I can understand wanting to take them down. And if it comes to that, it comes to that for some kind of reaching of middle ground. But I think that's where the Orwellian thing starts to happen. And I think in a country where individual rights and freedoms are held as paramount, as opposed to social rights, and individual rights and freedoms is going to, in a recognition and a respect of individual rights and freedoms, is what's going to pull the fabric together, because that's what can unify everyone. Is like, I respect the fact that Black Lives Matter as a premise should work. That should be in everyone's forefront and in their heart, right? But when people say all lives matter, some people are saying it with including Black lives, and some people use it as a cheap dismissal, and I understand that, and that's totally wrong, and that totally defeats the purpose. But at the same vein, it's this becomes this thing where I can't express myself because, well, I say, well, all lives matter because individual rights and freedoms matter. What happens to George Floyd can conceivably happen to me, and he was an American, and as an American, that should be offensive to even any individual right, because the government and the state violated that man's right to dignity, right? And everyone should recognize an individual right and freedom and also take it upon themselves to be responsible for themselves, right? So Derek Chauvin is certainly responsible for himself when he's enforcing the law, right? So that to me becomes this thing where you have to respect people's individual rights and freedoms of freedom of free speech, right to self-preservation, and all these things have to be a unifying standard. So no matter what background you have, this is where the rubber meets the road. And when you start saying, well, the person that can be offended could dictate terms to the person who commits said offense, or even without their knowledge, I think that creates two different standards, and that's going to just separate us more and more.
I also think that in the case of the statues, and if you're protecting individual freedoms, leaving them erect when they're offensive to people is not protecting everybody's freedom. If you want to keep those statues and they're a symbol of history to you, put them in your house. You can do that. You have the right to do that, but you can't make everybody appreciate them and look at them.
I wouldn't dare, I'm sorry to interject, but I wouldn't dare enforce that. I mean, how would anyone enforce that? Because multiple perspectives coming in one place, like in the Zoom meeting that we're having now, is healthy, right? Because you should look at a statue of Robert E. Lee and say, this guy was a really bad guy, and we don't need to take down his statue as a symbol of we've finally conquered, because there's thousands of souls that died in the Civil War that conquered him, and his constituents, right? But when it comes to the point where I can't watch the Dukes of Hazzard because there's the rebel flag on top of a car, it kind of falls in that same category, whereas free speech gets stifled. Because
I think there's also the difference, like in Dukes of Hazzard, the Confederate flag is there, or like if you read Huckleberry Finn, it's to that time, so it's relevant to when it was made. But if we have a statue that we're like, oh yeah, he was a bad guy, why is he even up? Why don't we have somebody that did something great that everybody can agree? We shouldn't be like, oh yeah, a lot of people defeated him, then maybe we should.
Sorry, go ahead. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No.
Something popped into my head. There was a statue in Boston, and his name escapes me. Matthias, he was an abolitionist, a staunch abolitionist, and he got called a slave owner and a racist, and his statue was completely destroyed. The Lincoln statue in Central, I think was it Central Park? That celebrated emancipation was destroyed, and this is Lincoln. See, this is like this crusade can become a thing where it's mob-like, and the mobs and mob justice isn't justice at all. It's vengeance, and there's an unquenchable thirst that can keep moving forward if people don't use reason and truth and evidence and history and a 360-degree panned out view of history instead of a one-dimensional view of history. Because racial injustices aren't just exclusive to people of color. I mean, there's other people that have suffered from racial injustice as well, particularly from Arab Barbary trade, slave trade. People couldn't do any fishing on the shores because they would get taken as slaves. The word slave comes from Slavic peoples suffered from slavery. So I think it can't be just this one-dimensional view of history. I think it has to be taken into account as a whole 360-degree perspective.
So I'll chime in. There's a lot to unpack in a short amount of time. First, you asked, are there words or are there truths that only people of color can speak? I will say yes, and I will put it in this sort of context. I think there are truths that only women can speak and then men cannot speak about. I am not going to understand what it's like to be a woman. So for me to sort of put my opinion out there about what it's like to be a woman, I can't do that. And to an extent, I find that sort of, we're using this offensive, but it just shows like a degree of why am I so bent on infusing my opinion in there as opposed to listening. So to those who say no, there are truths that everybody can speak. If you are going to speak truth about being a person of color and you are not, you better do the homework. If I'm going to speak on women's issues, then I need to have done the hard work in order to be able to speak that. So the atrocities that happen to women, and how they're treated in this country, I should not be able to speak on that, especially when so many men do, and it's apparent that they haven't listened at all. And I think that's the same to people of color. There are a million examples I can give that haven't even registered in white people's mind that I'll just say black people have experienced, because there's no way that they necessarily would have experienced that. And so in the climate as it is right now, I do think that there are some truths that only people of color can speak. Now, that doesn't mean that dialogue can't be open. Your white friend who came to you and said, oh gosh, I haven't been able to say this. This is the problem, is that so many people have spent so much time not listening that initial conversation starts very contentious. If white people have a question about black people and they're like, why can't I use the N-word? Well, a lot of black people experience with that is them going, why can't I use the N-word? It's ridiculous. You're able to use it, but I'm not. And so they aren't listening. Now, if a person has really taken the time to have that conversation and there's that understanding, then okay, they should absolutely be able to say these sort of things, their opinion. I don't think black people should be able to use the N-word if I don't. Okay, great. Well, let's have a discussion about it. Let's have a conversation about it instead of you just telling me what it is. And so that addresses that. I'm going to go to the statues. Statues are symbols of something. And especially like if there's a statue in a museum, people are there to kind of study and go, what is this a symbol of? If there's just a giant statue of Robert E. Lee in the middle of an intersection somewhere, how many people are really going, oh, well, what does this statue mean? And it's in the way that it's depicted. A lot of these Confederate heroes are depicted in a way that grandiose, makes them look powerful or good. I would never look at that statue as someone foreigner or had no idea. If I were to look at one of those statues and go, okay, what do you think about that person? Do you think they are a bad person or a good person? I personally think that most people are going to look at that statue and go, well, look at how they're presented. Of course, that was some sort of hero. That was some sort of hero to somebody. And symbols change. The swastika used to be a symbol of peace, good fortune, and everything. But guess what? Nazis messed that up. It is no longer that symbol. I went to Africa and they have swastikas all over. And I was like, what is going on here? But there, it's still that Indian and Hindu symbol of peace and good fortune. But here and in Europe, guess what? You can't just have a swastika up and go, well, this means something different to me. You have to understand what that symbol has turned into. And all these monuments to Confederacy, all of those came up in Jim Crow era. Why were they erected during that time? These people weren't heroes. You want to talk about, it's so crazy that so many people go, all right, well, the Confederacy was anti-American, wasn't it? I mean, they're fighting against America, in my estimation. So what do these statues symbolize? And even if they used to symbolize something good, they symbolize something completely different now. And I understand what you're saying. It's like, well, how far do we go? This is what happens when so many voices have been squashed for so long and people keep telling, well, this is history. This is just how it is. Well, guess what? You're going to have an overcorrection. You're going to have people saying, tear it all down then. because we have lived this way for decades or for centuries, and we're saying, hey, this is offensive, and being told to shut up for so long that guess what? Once one comes down, then everybody's going to be like, tear them all down. Because guess what? We haven't been heard this entire time. So that's to address sort of those two issues. And Ed, you said something about reason and truth. And therein that lies that word truth. It's like, you know, truth is going to be different than to everybody. And that's what we're trying to get to with these conversations, is going like, okay, is there a common truth here? Because we get told so many different things by people who have an agenda. What is the truth underneath all of this?
Hey, I want to clear something up just so before we keep going on. Ed, you mentioned about the statue. Who do you think defaced that statue?
Hey, Mel, I'm sorry. I'm going to ask you to hold that thought for a second. We have a comment from the audience, and that you're on.
So the first question was, I think that only people of certain demographic or people who can relate to a specific topic should be able to speak on it. And Gabe used the example of being a woman. Well, I can tell you this, that the majority of people who change their minds on a topic because they'd said something in a safe space to someone who, once they understood that perception, was able to give them factual knowledge and data to help them change their minds. You cannot change someone's mind if you don't let them speak. So just because they may be wrong, or maybe because they're coming with a truth that is their perception of reality that can be taken down by facts, doesn't mean that they've ever had the opportunity to have those facts presented to them. There's a lot of knowledge in the world. There's a lot of different experiences. There's a lot of different perceptions of reality. So saying that someone can't speak to something as to how they perceive it simply because they haven't experienced it isn't fair, because now you're denying them the knowledge of your experience. And then as to the statues, I mean, if George Washington and Thomas Edison and all the people who founded this country and brought it up had, if the original war, or Thomas Jefferson, I'm sorry, if they had lost the war, they would have been traitors. They would have been hung, they would have been quartered, and there would not have been statues erected of them. These statues are traitors to our country. They lost a war, and they absolutely do not deserve to have a place of prominence in this country under any circumstances, regardless of race. They are traitors to our country.
Okay, I'm sorry, if I could just have a quick little interjection. Truth is universal. Nobody has monopoly of the truth, because speaking your truth is kind of where I think the problem is because it's from your perspective. It doesn't necessarily have a 360-degree perspective because you're emotionally charged about it. So when another person or another party or a third party objectively looks at your particular circumstance and says, well, yes, this, but you had personal responsibility to this, that, and the other, I think that the truth has to be a thing that cannot be cornered by any one market. I think it has to be a universal understood truth. And with regards to the traitors and the statues, again, it falls under the category of freedom of speech. If someone wants to erect a statue of whoever, even if they erected, let's say the worst of the worst. I mean, who's worse than Hitler? I can't think of anybody worse than Hitler. If they erected a statue of Hitler, right, on private property, well, what can you do about it? Nothing, right? It's an abhorrent and repugnant thing to do, but this is a person's individual right and freedom. It is what it is. I mean, Skokie, the case in Skokie, Illinois, right, where the Supreme Court said that you have to let Nazis march. It becomes that particular thing. Now, the question becomes was this a state-funded project, right? If it's a state-funded project, well, I mean, you can make the case, I can see how you can make the case of taking the statue down. But again, where are we going from here if we just take a side to people's right to free speech and having the free speech injected from multiple points of view?
All right, we're gonna go, before you make a comment, Mel, hold that thought. I want to go to the audience, and we've got Doug.
Sorry, Mel. I owe you a mea culpa, bud.
All right. I went to go
Okay.
before my ex-neighbor.
Go
No,
ahead, Melvin. Go ahead.
no, Doug, go ahead.
Doug, you're on.
Well, Melvin, Gabriel, hi. Good to see you guys. It's so this is on you, Melvin. This is you brought me into this with very little notice, and I come to you as a graduate of a small liberal arts college in upstate New York called West Point, where barracks named for Lee and MacArthur and Doug and Grant and Benjamin O. Davis stand side by side. I am a chemistry and history major, 33 years in the infantry and the Army. Color never factored into any of the decisions I made in those 33 years. I am put off by the views that the monuments of today or of yesteryear have no place in society today. To quote my German wife, her quote, now there is one rather rude but still relatively nice word. I mean, not, she says, "You Americans have such damn little history, and yet you are tearing down what little you have." And I recognize that those monuments, especially on Monument Avenue in Richmond and elsewhere, may have different meaning to others than myself. I look at them merely as a reflection on where America was. It's not where America is today. And if we tear them down, we are simply denying the fact that that part of our history ever existed. And I'll leave it at that.
I think that.
Go ahead, Cass.
Oh, you were gonna speak before Doug came on, so you can go.
Well, no, if you had a reaction to Doug, I can always yell at him later.
I do, but Cassidy, please.
I think that, well, what did I think? I think that, well, I lost my thought.
Well, when you get it, go ahead.
So I'm just going to put this out there, right? So we're talking about history, okay? 4 years ago, we'll just say textbooks in the United States are decided for the entire country based on what their biggest markets sell, which is Texas. And 4 years ago, Texas erased a lot of Latino history out of their history books. So I put this out there. If that is our history, why don't we, there's so much history that hasn't been told. So all of these statues are a very one-sided view of history. And so when people say your history, you're tearing down your history, well, our history has been torn down and sort of dictated what our history is by certain people. And so I would, Doug, I would agree with you if this was sort of a level playing field at any point in time. If there were tons of statues up of all different sort of races and people who have done great things for this country, but so much of our history has been hidden or erased that I will just say that it's easier, and please understand that I'm saying this generally, okay? And I don't mean to call anybody out. I think it's easier for white people to say, don't tear down the history that this country has. And Black people, Latino people, women have been stripped of their history. I don't think our history books teach history. They teach, and you're a history major, Doug, so I'd love to have this conversation with you. But our history books, the problem has been that they are geared towards nationalism as opposed to really teaching history. Now, that is my viewpoint on it. from the studying that I have done, there is a large void of history of this country that isn't being taught and isn't there. So that's why I personally have problem with people saying, don't erase our history. And statues aren't represented of necessarily history. Again, statues are a symbol of something. And that sort of what they represent can be led up to interpretation. I want to say thank you for your service, Doug. Also, Anthony, thank you for your service. Any military people, thank you for your service. I want to put that out there. So
Thank you for your service.
Well, before,
And speaking of that, before you go, thanking him for his service, Anthony has another comment, so we're going to let him speak, and then you can make yours.
Anthony has had more comments than I have.
Maybe Anthony's more articulate.
Put me on the panel.
Ow, there is some,
I'm the moderator. I shouldn't
okay,
say it. I take
fair
that
enough.
back.
I'm staying out of it.
Anthony, you're on.
All right, so with the topic about the statues, if we want to go on about it, the reality is we have never had a resolution. You know, you bring it back to the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. We've had progress. There was never a resolution. The statues are representing where people are. When you look at the Civil War, there wasn't any resolution in the same aspect of any other country and their civil wars. When another country has a civil war, the statues they tear down are down permanently. They don't put them back up years later. That's every other country on planet Earth. We're unique because we put these statues back up to represent a mentality. The mentality never left. We never had a real resolution. And this is a scary topic because I don't want to see our country being torn apart by another civil war, but we never had a resolution of the first one. So I say leave the statues up until we're at a different mindset as a whole. But if people want to hold on to something that hasn't been resolved, you can't take it down if it hasn't been resolved. Just like any other country, they take their statues down and they don't come back up. I just want to leave off with that.
Not every other country. We're not. We have free speech is foundational to this country. That's where the baby needs to be kept, and the bathwater needs to be thrown out in terms of, let's throw out the bathwater and keep the baby. Free speech is part of that baby, whether it's a leg or an arm or a heart or a head, I don't know, of the baby, but it's part of the goodness of this country. And if it was an olive branch where you could take all the Confederate statues down and it's left at that, and then we're back to something that, yeah, we're good now. I have a fear that would not be enough, that it would not rest there, because it's like you give that over, and then what's next? Well, because we're coming from this same place, and you must yield. I think that's a really, really slippery slope.
That's always been the resolution of our country. That's always been after free speech, when people are done talking, when people can't figure out or compromise, we go to a different method. That's always been the history of this country. And I'm not saying that it's necessary for us to keep going on that route, but that's kind of where we're at, because we're still having the same conversations about the same issues. And I'm saying these little bits of progress from the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, that's great. But the question is now, are we done, or how much longer do we have to keep going?
We'll ever be done. I don't think we'll ever be done. To put a cap on it and say, yay, racism is in the rearview mirror. I'd like to say the same thing about Marxism, but you can't kill an idea. How can you kill an idea?
I think this goes back to, first of all, the statues are very different than, it's a whole separate topic within itself, but it is used as a smokescreen to what the bigger issue is. What I was going to say way back when, Ed, was, you remember you said that the person that they marked up that wasn't, I was going to ask you, who do you think did that?
That's a great question. I mean, I wasn't there.
Right.
Certainly antagonistics and people who are lack education, I would say.
No, it was done by the anti-fascist group, or Alpha.
Antifa.
Antifa.
Antifa, which is very different than the black movement. I couldn't remember that.
I agree with you. I totally agree with you.
Moment, but people are confusing that as, you know, part of the Black Lives Movement. And the reason that we're, you know, people are asking to remove the statues, you know, it's because this was happening way before Black Lives Matter, but it was because of what it represented. It is once again, like the word political correctness, you know, people are looking at, oh, they just want to get rid of racism. That was never the design. It is to bring people awareness and bring us up to the 20th century. Because the opposite side of that question, if though, you know, those statues represent something entirely different, and it was missed, but I know it was said in the chat rooms and stuff like that, they were erected to make a statement. They were erected to, and Anthony was talking about resolution, saying, yeah, because they didn't accept the defeat, you know, of the North and the South and that whole fight and stuff like that. It is to raise awareness, but that's a whole separate, I think, of an argument or another topic that we can talk about, because it does have a lot to it. There's a lot of baggage with this because it hits so many people. And like, you know, and so I think trying to cover that in this section or in this, you know, is going to distract from what the message was in terms of what we were talking about, and that is looking at political correctness. Because, you know, I think at a certain time, look at when they were erected, that's all important. Trying to understand why they are erected, that's important. But we aren't going to be able to cover that because, once again, I don't think tearing down a statue or defacing a statue is about racism. Antifa was talking about, you know, because they have a different ideology.
Sure, absolutely.
Right?
I absolutely agree.
So I don't know if we're going to get anywhere with, you know, I mean, talking about that. I certainly would like it to be part of another conversation.
Yeah, that's a whole thing.
But I'm hoping that, and I'm not the moderator, even though we look like twins, I am not the moderator.
Are you guys related?
I don't know him.
I never knew. I never dawned on me. Never dawned on me once.
And
I thought you and I were related, Melvin.
Yeah, and my friend Doug, you know, and his wife, you know, I've had these type of conversations in regards to just the ideology of what we're really talking about is what's important is what's happening now, and when, you know, in terms of this the rift that we're having in our society today, I think talking about the statue is going to distract from that at this moment. I think it's part of the conversation, but I'd like to
I would just interject one thought. I think, and this is just a rhetorical question, I think, can one consider the possibility that people with ulterior motives are using the Black Lives Matter premise and movement to a certain degree, excluding the organization itself? Are they being driven by ulterior motives who seek to replace our rule of law and our system of doing things with Marxism? So I think that's that. And again, it's a rhetorical question that I just would put out there on people's radar to think about. I think that there is something there that needs to be addressed.
I think, you know, Black Lives Matter, once again, as I said, it is set up, it is to focus on a particular issue.
Oh yeah, I agree.
And people are, and you're going to find people on the fringes jumping in because they have their own agenda, and it's
Right.
getting diluted. And I think one of the questions, or we're talking about like the riots, you know, I don't know if it came up yet or, you know, but yeah, you're gonna, sometimes you have to be profane in order to be profound. In other words, I think, you know, that's part of the whole process. And I think when you say, well, people think the statues are an issue, or they think, oh, well, do we have to, you know, do we have to riot to make, you know, to make these things known? The only way that our politicians hear, or anybody, hear anybody, is if you become that squeaky wheel, if you scream loud enough and often enough. And sometimes, you know, I grew up back when, you know, riots in the streets were, you know, very prominent, you know, when the police officers, the Gestapo police officers were spraying people with, you know, with fire hoses, breaking bones and sicking dogs on people, you know, because they were afraid of what was coming. And I think this is a long time coming. I know I'm kind of long-winded, but basically I want to say is that Black Lives Matter, that's, like I said, it is not trying to clear up racism, you know, but it's just wanting people to get focused on something that has been
I
systemic
understand.
for a long time. We have a systemic problem, and in order for some of that to change, nobody has changed. When, you know, it's kind of like when you lift weights, no pain, no gain. And the same thing here. If you don't do something, you know, going up to Washington, talking to the heads and saying, hey, please, we want to make these changes, you know, and we've been saying that like forever. And now we're at a place where now we have to be profane about how we do things. So.
All
Also,
right, so I'm gonna stop it there. Mel's gonna have the last word on the panel before we pivot, but we do have one more comment from the audience who's gonna get the last word on this topic. Doug, you're on.
Okay.
So Melvin and I are of a similar age and hairstyle.
Yeah.
And so, you know, one of the things that I look back upon growing up in the late 60s when I was, you know, 10 years old roughly, my father, the World War II veteran, who watched the unrest on college campuses across America and the visible, visceral reaction he was having to what was going on in America. And that was imprinted on me as he watched what his country that he had fought for was becoming. And I feel some of that visible, visceral reaction. I have some of that now as I watch what's going on across our country. The upside, on a positive side, we came through that. And I think we, as a nation, were better for having gone through it. I think we'll be better having going through this. I don't like what I'm seeing on TV. I'm prompted to rally the boys and go take care of some of that nonsense going on in Seattle. But that's why they put old soldiers out to pasture, so we don't do things like that. But nevertheless, those old soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marine were out there, and we're not very happy with what's going on in our cities and across our nation, statues aside. But I think, looking back on it as a historian, a chemist, really a chemistry major who got sidetracked into history, I think we're going to be okay coming out of this. There'll be changes. There'll be positive changes. Just like there were at the height of the Vietnam War when the Army was at its lowest. You know, the American people have an Army they can be proud of that is there is no color barrier. And I stand firm on that. There's no color barrier in the military. I wish society could be as colorblind. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Doug. Doug got the last word on that topic, and we're gonna pivot one more time. So let me set up the next segue. You know, there are some who believe, and I happen to be one of them, that we lack true national sources of truth. The so-called media and news industry has become an entertainment industry with a vested interest in influencing rather than informing. So, you know, I would challenge anyone to listen to CNN or Fox News or wherever you get to and just count the number of times that you hear the words, I think, as opposed to hearing actual facts and facts alone. So what you see is that there's an interest in that influencing. What you see really is that when you look at an event like it's happening right now, is that the media lines up behind narratives, and they supply these narratives to us that are filtered through points of view. I refer to this as polarism. I mean, it's not just me, it's polarizing, right? So think about what you're seeing right now. If you're watching CNN, the narrative is all about the protests and Black Lives Matters and what the meaning of these protests should be and what their goals are seeking. If you watch Fox News, the narrative is about the violence, the rioters, the looters, and the need to regain law and order in our country. Two completely opposing points of view from those organizations that are supposed to be informed, or most Americans look to inform us. That's a problem we'll talk about on another time. The question that I want to pose here is, do the narratives, when we look at that, do the narratives tell the whole story? Or how do let me rephrase that. Given that our media has given themselves over to being influencers rather than informers, what do you think the average American needs to do in order to really inform themselves? How do we as Americans cut through all of the noise that's out there in order to be informed as we approach a voting season? What do you think? And I'm going to throw it to Ed first. What are your thoughts?
It's, whoever your herald is, right? If people have a certain paradigm they wish to be in, well, if Don Lemon is your herald, then you're going to take what he says as doctrine. I mean, that's kind of the thing. And to be fair, what's the Tucker Carlson for me is kind of that herald too, right? And I have to kind of watch myself on both ends so I don't get too drifted one way or the other. But it seems to me like right now, who's controlling the heralding, at least on the internet, and certainly in a lot of traditional mainstream media, is the left. And I think that's kind of the problem. It's that we've abandoned objective journalism for motivated journalism, one way or the other. And it seems like to me that in this particular case with what's going on, and from what I've seen, Tucker Carlson has made a lot of solid points that I've heard from other folks who aren't even remotely right-wing, like John McWhorter. He's made similar points as Tucker Carlson about how this movement and the organization has become a seat of power and is looking to inch upon taking down the good parts of this country, which gives me grave concern. But it has to get funneled back into a point where let's just be objectively honest about what's going on from both ends. But if you have two different heralds shouting and making proclamations in one way or the other, it's like it becomes a competition of echoes. And I think that's disastrous.
Others?
I'll say that I think first and foremost, you have to sort of analyze your biases. So I have a lot of Facebook friends that are, and this is not you, Ed. I'm talking about, extremists on the other side of what I believe, because I'm trying to understand what information they get fed. Because at the end of the day, it's like, how can someone who is, we'll just say a good person, which is a subjective term, how do two people that are good people, like good intentioned in their heart, have such vastly different views? And there's obviously a lot of different reasons for that. But I wanted to understand what people who aren't like me are getting fed. And it's easy to sort of pick apart the information that they're getting fed and logically sort of dissect that and go, this doesn't make sense. How can this person believe it? But if you are presented with information that you are more in tune with, that you are going to be on that side of what you believe, then you don't scrutinize that information coming to you as much as you scrutinize the information going to other people. And what you start to see is these sort of loopholes and generalizations, things that you want to believe. We talked about Black Lives Matter, and it's hard to say, okay, well, Black Lives Matter, are we talking about the idea of it or the actual organization? Because these people that you're talking about are like, oh, these are Black Lives Matter people. Just because I believe that Black Lives Matter is something that needs to be focused on doesn't mean that I represent that organization. So if I go out and I, shoot somebody, does that mean a member of Black Lives Matter shot somebody else? No, it doesn't. But I say this because there starts to get things presented like, oh, look at this Black Lives rally, Black Lives Matter rally. And there's somebody shouting on a bullhorn that's like, white people need to be taken down and this and that. And then I was looking at that, and this was from one of those feeds from somebody who I don't agree with. And I go, nothing on there is any proof of a Black Lives Matter organization or rally. It's just one person shouting on a megaphone their beliefs, but then it goes, oh, look at these Black Lives Matter people. And you have to understand how sort of media, and this is becoming like a tricky thing because people don't know who to trust. But it's also because you have your lives going on and there's all of this stuff. And so for you to dissect and scrutinize every piece of information that goes to you, it's incredibly tough unless you set yourself up that way. Unless you're going, oh, I'm not going to necessarily just believe this on snap judgment. Let me really understand what information is being fed to me and from what source, and let me find the truth in that. What is really going on, especially if it's something that you're so passionate about and believe in change. So I think that's step one, is like analyzing your own bias and then also looking at your sources and having open conversations with people who are nothing like, on paper, they're nothing like you. I think Ed and I would not be anything alike on paper, but him and I have been friends for a long time, and we can come together and have these discussions and go, oh, okay, let me get a different perspective on that. So,
and I think that's important. It's got to be a two-way street. And I remember, if I remember rightly, forgive me if I put you on the spot, Gabe, but we had when we initially had a Facebook post that we were conversing on, I think it was the George Floyd tragedy, I'll say, because that's the appropriate word, at least in my mind, that, there has to be open minds on both sides. And I feel that still is that has to be the case. It's like, I am with you. I want racism for myself. Even as a Middle Easterner, I've had things come my way. And granted, I'm white, okay? I'm not, nothing advertised on my outward appearance says Middle Eastern. But, it has to be open-mindedness. Yes, here is what's going on from our end. No, wait, this is what's going on from your end as I see it, but that's not true, and so on and so forth. And there has to be this open-minded thing, because I saw a video not too long ago, just really quickly, and now this video, I think it was, where Black Lives Matter protesters were at a Trump rally in a park somewhere. And eventually what ended up transpiring is the Trump supporters and the Trump rally organizers allowed the Black Lives Matter folks to take the stage. And there ended up being some kind of common ground reached. And that gives me hope. That gives me a lot of hope that two different points of view, conservative and liberal, can funnel themselves into a common understanding and a recognition of individual value. You know what I mean? Like individual rights, individual freedoms, individual responsibility, and also understanding where each side is coming from. It has to be an open two-way street, in my humble opinion.
All right, we've got a comment from the audience now, and Cindy, you're up. And thank you for joining. I'm still stalling while I wait for you to be unmuted. There you are, you're open.
Thank you, William, very much. You started off with seek first to understand, and I think when I'm watching the news and I see a panel of experts telling me what the news was and then defining it for me does take away my ability to decide for myself what it means. And I thought that as I'm taking in the information, it is then incumbent upon me to educate myself further, to seek out friends that I trust, find out from them their thoughts, their opinions, other people that might know something different. And every once in a while tune into opposite viewpoint news stations. And so I do think that it's important that we don't just take what's spoon-fed to us. As adults, once we move beyond high school and college, we are responsible then for continuing to grow and learn and evolve. And I'm really happy that we've got this forum together to hear people and hear what they have to say. Again, I mentioned about the Beverly Hills protest in the chat that was talked about. A friend sent me a Twitter and blanketly said, this happened in Beverly Hills last night and it was Black Lives Matter. But when you listen to what they were saying and you look at the history, you can tell that it was a different tone, a different conversation. You know, eat the rich. It wasn't a topic that has ever been what I've seen to date about what Black Lives Matter has spoken about. And so we had this very long debate even before this webinar, and it was utterly frustrating trying to help someone look beyond their bias as well about what something meant. So I, for myself, am just trying very hard to open myself up to explore other thoughts and ideas that might not be something I was raised with or something that I was taught or something that I thought I knew. That's it.
Well said, thank you. Panel, comments?
I
Let me
agree
throw-
that,
Okay.
oh,
Go ahead.
when you take in the news, you do need to look at the sources and also evaluate it for yourself and try to see different perspectives, talk to people. It's a conversation. It's not really, these things have so many different colors to them, like black, white, there's all kinds of gray in the middle, and there are so many different stances to take. So it's just a continuing conversation.
Yeah, and I agree with Cindy. I think it is your responsibility as an adult to sort of seek out and filter through what we're fed. And especially, I will say, if you're somebody who's out there advocating and being a voice out there to educate yourself, not just, you know, oh, I saw something, I saw one video and then I instantly believe it, and now I'm projecting it out there and becoming a false news. I don't want to say false news source, but I'm just like amplifying what might not be sort of the truth.
Just finding something that supports your narrative.
Yep.
But I think that, you know, there's been a couple of comments, and I first want to say something Ed had said a long time ago in terms, truth is universal, and truth, it just depends on. Well, I work in a field where the truth requires perspective. I mean, who, you know, because obviously my truth and your truth, there's no right or wrong with regards to that. It's just on, you know, whose lens are we looking through? And what I do, kind of like what Cindy was talking about is I have to, when I do therapy, I don't try to interject my truth into what the person's saying, but try to help them to come to some sort of conclusion. And by doing that, it requires that, we both have to do some sort of research on what that is. And research is very important because you can listen to CNN and you have to recognize, all, for anyone's on television, news has become more entertainment than it has been, more about giving out information and stuff like that. Even back in the day when I was growing up, Huntley and Brinkley and them, they were coming from a different perspective altogether. And so you can't just have one source, you have to have a bunch of sources to do that and piece together. And when you find, because, when you find, like when I do therapy, I find there's some kernel of truth in what the person is saying. And then I have to do what you talk about, Gabriel, and that is, I have to understand how come they're saying, what is their, basically, what is that person's perspective? So then I can understand where they're coming from, and then I can speak from that truth. I don't know if that makes sense. I know that's social work babble, but that's where my truth is, okay? And I, when I look at the news, I could tell you that I am more interested. I try to listen to people who disagree with my thinking, and I try to listen to them because there is some truth in what they're saying. I mean, like with Donald Trump, he has done some good, but my truth is I don't want to hear any of that nonsense, but in reality, there is some truth to that. And so I go to different sources to get my information, because that's the only way I'm really going to have to then decide for myself what is true, So, okay. So,
all right. Mel, thank you. We're going to go to the audience for a comment from Sargon. Sargon, your mic is open. Go ahead.
All right, thank you guys for having me here. By the way, but I wanted to say on this, media is always biased. It's hard for people and humans in general to not be biased on the things that they have in their heads, and most times you got to check yourself on that. Kind of like that Cindy was saying earlier, and everybody's been saying right now. And one of the best ways to do that is not only researching and engaging afterwards and looking at other sources in unbiased ways, but also engaging in other people's and like letting people. A lot of people come very aggressive lately because their beliefs are shamed the moment they start to bring them out, especially in times like this. So like it's best to come out and be accepting and let people be heard, not only because it helps them feel better inside, to feel like their thoughts value in a time when a lot of people are shaming theirs, but like you really helps to give you perspective. It helps you to get more information and research that you haven't even found yet. It gives you more direct sources to look exactly for, to find information for all spectrums of the problem that's going on. And systematic oppression is a huge problem all around. And there's so much, there's problems on all sides of the spectrum that you can pay attention to and find the points into. And and it's best to find those through people. So that's all I really wanted to add to the conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sargon. Comments, panel?
Well, okay. Just to kind of piggyback on what Melvin was saying, because it's kind of related to what Sargon just said. I feel like when you're a therapist, right, you have to pull yourself back and see that, pan yourself out. If I go astray, please correct me. So because you are empathizing with the person, but you don't necessarily sympathize with them. You give them empathy so that you say, here, I'm an open heart and I'm going to listen, but I'm going to tell you some things that you may not be seeing based on your emotional state, so that they can work their way back into a rational state of being, right? Well, with Sargon's proposition and question, it seems like to me when conservatives, we feel like we're not being heard when Google dictates who's at the top of of the uh, of the searches, right? And it seems that all of those things, all of those links are linked to left-wing thought and thinking tanks and information sources. So it's kind of hard to see things from multiple perspective when you're being spoon-fed majority of the media and majority of social media and the internet is being monitored by people who want to push a certain political perspective, which happens to be like this progressive, hard left faction. And it's kind of disconcerting. It's hard to say, okay, well, you know, it's like people on this point, particular subject, whatever it may be, yeah, okay, I only have this point of view, therefore that has to be the truth, when there's like, no, there's other perspectives like Dennis Prager who get labeled as propaganda. And it's like, no, he's just presenting his point of view, and it's for you to say, oh, well, maybe I should investigate multiple aspects of things. And I think that gets lost in a wash when social media and the mainstream media are being directed to take people's minds a certain way.
All right. Other thoughts? Gabe, you look like you've got a thought.
I've had a million thoughts. It's just how do you? I have a lot of thoughts. You need to open yourself up to. I mean, this is what we're trying to do, right? Is have these conversations and sort of hear from different voices. And as this continues, you know, hopefully we get to hear from many different voices. And I definitely appreciate all the chiming in from the attendees and the thoughts put out there. We're going to have sort of an issue. You know, you're saying Google and all these people are sort of forming the information that we're fed in a certain way. And I'll say this will sort of segue to I think what I want to say overall is that we are being divided, you know, by everybody. We're going to by people with a certain agenda. I feel somebody has to have some sort of agenda, whether it's good intent or bad intent. You know, let me lump you into Democrat or Republican so I can understand how I can get somebody nominated. You know, somebody with my interest or whatnot, or understand where a candidate is. I'll say this. You know, you're very much, you're talking about where we're progressing to, and it being sort of a viewpoint where it's been a certain viewpoint for so long. And my concern is with the things, with the statue, with everything we've sort of been talking about, is that you look at it and it's like, okay, well, this is kind of a slippery slope. This free, you know, where do we go if we start tearing down statues and whatnot? But the problem is I watched an interview with James Baldwin, 1968, on the Dick Cavett Show, right? And he said, what do Negroes want right now? We've come so far. We've advanced so far. And I don't, and I, the people I talk to echo that right now. And there's so many things that are being ignored, that have been ignored because people are being too sensitive, or it's not as bad as you think it is, or media has sort of shifted us this way or that way. Progress has been slow because there's so many, because there are hard topics that people don't want to talk about. They either don't have the arena to talk about it, or they don't want to talk about it for a multitude of reasons. And one I mainly think is because they don't want to confront their actual feelings inside. We're talking about bias. People have bias. I am a women's rights advocate. I have been since I was 16, actively doing things, but that doesn't mean that there is not misogyny in me, that hasn't been ingrained in me because of this whole, what I think that this country has sort of been built on, and the flow of information, how that has happened and how it's progressed. I think that our nation is a very misogynistic one. I will just say that for myself. And so I get fed that same sort of information. I have to look inside myself and go, okay, where are these biases lie? And to Sargon's point, to Cindy's point, to a lot of people's point here is I have to go outside of myself and actively try and listen and learn and go, that is my intent here. And I said it at the beginning, I am trying to understand so I can facilitate change. I have always viewed myself as a bridge for people, especially because you can, if it's a secret to other people, guess what? Mel is my dad. So that's one side, and the other side is white. Well, I will say European because white is not not a race. So Yugoslavia, and then you could see my dad. But I've always tried to be a bridge because I can step back and go, okay, there are truths here. Like, where is the common ground? Where is the underlying thing? So just to kind of speak to you, there's a lot of things that we are not addressing that have come from our past that it's steering itself in a way for a reason. Wish I could have wrapped that up in a more articulate way, but that's fine. That's where I am. Hopefully some of that made sense to anybody.
All right, last word. He gets it.
I just want to say quickly that, it becomes I just think if, in this pursuit of equality, that we don't jettison the things that made us equal, like the rule of law. The Civil Rights Act is a byproduct of the rule of law. And if we jettison the rule of law, which has been formed over not just this country's history, but all of human history. I mean, it took years and millennia to get us to this point of personal freedom. And when you start comparing America to other countries, let's say Middle Eastern countries, and I could give you even an example in my own personal history of Lebanon, where women aren't exactly looked at the same as they are here, right? I mean, it's just it's a totally culturally different thing. And even you could take it to Muslim majority countries who have Sharia law that say that women have to wear something to cover themselves from the sun. It's like, we have to be honest in our comparisons to where we are to other countries. And I think we are a damn sight farther than a lot of other places because of the rule of law and because of respect to individual rights and freedoms. And my fear is, with all these causes that want social justice and want to achieve it through equality of outcome, is that it's going to take a scythe to all of that.
I also don't, just one thought on that. I don't think that it is fair to compare ourselves to somebody else. It's just like your inner growth that you're trying to work on. So if we see that we're still behind on something, like we live in a misogynistic country where women aren't treated well, or we live in a systematically racist country and minorities aren't treated well, I think we can still work to improve that, and we shouldn't stay stagnant in something that is just because we're better than somebody else, or we think we're, doesn't mean that we can just leave it be.
Of course not. And I agree with you. I think it's like, you know, the windmill can only take so much water in at a time. And I'm of the belief that any meaningful change is step by step, as opposed to broad brushing things. And then, all right, we're equal. And then, oh my God, we forgot about this, that, and this. And I think that's where it becomes problematic, where we say that the system is racist when it could be just operator error and racists in the system who don't need to be there, or even Marxists in the system who don't need to be there, who don't value what's best in America. So,
all right, and Ed's going to get that last word there, but the final word is going to come from our audience again, and that's Cindy. Go ahead, Cindy.
Oh, thank you, William, very much. I had an experience this morning when I happened to mention to a family member about Black Lives Matter, and they answered me with, well, Black Lives Matter isn't what you think it is. And I asked the question, what do you think I think it is? And it occurred to me, I was very offended by somebody telling me what I thought something was without asking me what I thought it was. And it occurs to me in this situation, for many, many, many years, white people have told the world what Black people think. And I am so happy now that I am at a place where I want to hear what Black people think about your life experiences, your world. And I'm emotional about it now because I don't think anybody should be told what they think. And I really appreciate this forum and this opportunity to hear, and the willingness, Gabe, of you and your family and all of these people to engage those of us who want to hear what you have to say and share your thoughts and your feelings so that I can be better educated and better understand. Because you know what? I don't know what you think if I don't ask. And so many times we don't even bother asking. So thank you for setting up a forum by which questions can be asked.
All right, well said. Thank you, Cindy.
Thank you,
And
Cindy.
I think that is the perfect last word on this. So to wrap up, I just want to say, first of all, to our fantastic panel, thank you so much for joining. Ed, Cassidy, Mel, Gabe, appreciate the courage it takes to come here. I appreciate your openness. And I want to point out something, that we had these diverse viewpoints here, and no one called anyone else the enemy. No one else tried to demonize someone else's thought. And you see that we could all sit here and talk, and we found common ground on certain issues. Other ones we had a lot of good discussion, and I think we learned something from each other in terms of just the various viewpoints. And that's what Unitix, Not Politics is all about. I want to put out just a quick plug for UNP and say that we're a new group. We're going to continue to sponsor these forums monthly, the last Saturday of every month, unless we need to adjust for holidays. And so look for that. So I do hope that you'll participate. We're looking for more panelists. If you want to be a panelist, or even if you know someone who could be a good panelist and you want to suggest them, please drop us a line. Also, please check our Facebook page. We got it up. We're working hard to get up a blog as well. We'll be looking to sponsor some other events, and we're looking for volunteers, people who are like-minded, who want to heal this country, not by pointing fingers and arguing and calling each other names, but through genuine conversation and engagement in which we learn about each other, find that common ground, and we try to move forward. So please, if you know people who you think would enjoy this forum, could add to it, want to listen, please invite them, tell them about UNP, tell them about this monthly forum. Let's get this nation talking to each other. We can solve these problems by communicating with one another if we can be honest and open and start from the idea that no one here is an enemy. We may have different ideas, but we can turn that diversity into a strength if we want to. We can do this better than we've been doing, and that's what Unitix, Not Politics, is all about. So thank you everyone for joining this first forum. I hope you enjoyed the conversation, and I hope you will join us for all of the other ones. Remember to send us an email, and we have one quick poll that we'd like for you to take before you leave us. Hopefully you see it on your screen right now. And for me, I'll say thank you again, panelists. Thank you again, audience. Everyone deserves a great round of applause. Thank you for making this a success.